Evening class. It's going to be lecture 2.2 or the second lecture of week 2 here at MS528, and today we're specifically going to talk about organizational setup as far as the structures that you can choose for. Last class we talked about legal stuff, which I'll do a quick recap, but for this specific lecture we're going to talk about the different structures that you can utilize to set up your organization for growth and factor in that specifics to it. So I hope you enjoy, and looking forward to going over this material with you as well. So, all right, so a quick recap from last class. What we talked about was organizational designation as far as the various areas that you can go with that, as far as sole proprietorship, partnerships, limited liability company, limited liability partnerships, S Corp, C Corps, nonprofits, and doing business as setups. And then we talked about the various legal and risks that associate with you going through, setting up your organization and knowing all the legalities and the risk factors that can play into it and go with that. And we discussed that extensively last class. So if you haven't, please take a look at that recorded lecture. It's also under their Module 2 section. Also, we discussed IP protections, just going over NDAs, patents, copyrights, provisional patents, and trademarks. So that way you can get an understanding of exactly how you would protect yourself as an organization. If you have offering a product or service, you trademark your logos, any copywritten material, NDAs to hold whether or not it's an employee base or not, and going from that portions. We discussed insurance, the various different insurances that are out there for organizations and ones that you may or may not be regulatory needs of whatever you're specifically doing in your industry or market. We talked about employment agreements as far as setting up various employment style agreements for your employees, because they're going to have to abide by those. And then any regulatory needs that you need of industry based on whatever your market viability or your industry standards are, so that way you can be prepared and doing and pretty much like dotting all the I's and crossing your T's, so to speak, so you don't get fined or cease and desist or stepping on anyone's toes or having some government agency, regulatory agency coming after you for various reasons and causing you havoc and issues. All right, so that's what we discussed last class, so I enjoyed that. Now, the agenda for today is specifically and only going to be on organizational structures. Now, I have discussed this in past lectures and classes, but I'm going to go a lot more in depth as far as the pros and cons, the limitations, and how that works with the various organizational structures that you can choose from and scale within your organization. So, the overall importance of choosing an organizational structure is, depending on which one you go with and how you set it up, it can either hinder or help your scalability when you start to grow and you start to maximize your organization setup. When you start as an entrepreneur, it might be a one-person shop as far as either you or your only employee, so to speak. But as you start to add in individuals, contract out work, and start to be having more departments, so to speak, it starts to become pretty unmanageable over time. So you want to make sure that you choose something that you can scale and grow with and make adjustments to if you need to. It also, as you're setting up your organization, it creates a standards of communications and innovations within your organization. So depending on whatever structure you decide to go with, that can be either conducive or not conducive to innovation and communication, depending on whatever you're specifically doing. Not all industries and areas are a requirement of having an innovative or a super communicative workforce, but if you're going down that route, you want to make sure that you facilitate that that's the way you want to be. I mean, if you're going down the route of like setting up like a Google or a Facebook or a highly communicative like Apple company, then you're going to want to make that a standard. If you're making more like, if you're going down the manufacturing line and you're going to be doing something that's highly regulatory and highly like unsafe, and you need to have very, very strict bureaucratic guidelines, you need to also set up in that manner as well. And we'll discuss the various ways that you can do that. It also overall sets the company tone for the culture that you're going to be pushing through, whether it's going to be very communicative, very collaborative, very systems thinking, where everyone kind of knows what they're doing and understands where they fit in the mold, so to speak. You want to make sure that you're setting that, and that's what makes it important. And then also, depending on how you run your organization and you set it up, that's going to affect the ability to recruit and retain employees, because the way that your organizational setup and structure is may or may not attract the personnel that you're looking for, or it may attract the right talent or the wrong talent, or just not attract talent at all. So you want to make sure that you keep that in mind for when you're going through this process and setting it up for yourself. Now, the organizational structures we're going to talk about today, and I love talking about this topic, are traditional hierarchies, web, flat hierarchies, and holacracy. We're going to go through each individual one and do the limitations and the benefits of how that goes. Now, traditional hierarchies are the most common and easiest to understand. It's a typical chain of command, one rules many, so to speak. It's very prevalent and been around for hundreds of years, if not thousands of years. It's a very common military, clergy, church type setup where it just has, I don't want to call it a pyramid setup, but that's kind of the way it works. And like I said, it's most widely used structure out there because it's very comfortable. People have it's been ingrained in our society for a very long time, so people become very understanding of this chain of command setup. But it does have its limitations, which we'll discuss. But as far as like the benefits of going down the traditional hierarchy, because it is a very dated form of I guess organizational setup and structure. But the benefits and the reason it goes, many companies go down this line is because it is very easy to scale. I mean, as you grow, you can simply just add different departments and add different roles and responsibilities based on needs of the organization. You can create teams quite easily this way. It gives very rigid roles and responsibilities. So, I mean, you are aligned to know exactly what you're going to be doing as far as the role, responsibility, and title that you have. It's very easy to align accountability because, one set employee has a job and has a responsibility, right? And then also most employees are familiar with the chain of command setup, so they ease into it. It's a very kind of group think understanding that this is the mentality, and it's very easy for people to assimilate in that type of setup. It can be catered to most industries also. It's not conducive or to one or the other. It can be kind of catered to whatever industry or marketplace that you're pushing it through, or whatever your company does as a whole. Decisions are always made at one level. So if you want to keep control factors and things of that nature, it's very easily done this way. And then communication is also controlled. If you don't want a lot of ingrained communication throughout the organization, or a lot of top-down or down-up communication, you can stop that, because typically in a traditional hierarchy, it's only going to be a top-down communication, not vice versa. So the CEOs, the CFOs, and all the executive teams don't usually discuss or have communication lines with the frontline employees or the frontline managers, so they don't need to, if that's not conducive or needed, which I'll be honest, rarely it's very needed, but many organizations don't think it is. But anyway, traditional hierarchy is a very easy way to go. Like I said, it's scalable, it's easy, people are very familiar with it, they're comfortable with it, it has the titles and all the things that you can go with it. Very easy to assign accountability and responsibilities. Now, the limitations with this is it does have rigid roles and responsibilities. So when you outline a person's specific job criteria and responsibilities, it's very hard to kind of get them to think outside of their own realm, or get them to do other things, because it's not really part of their job responsibility, and it's not part of their agreement. It can cause many redundant positions to happen, because as growth of organizations may move pretty rapidly, there might be people that kind of overlap in roles and responsibilities and causing wasteful positions within the organization. I used to do consulting, and this happens all the time, especially at the mid-level manager to the higher level manager areas. There's many people that don't really do anything, but but you have to kind of sift that out. And when you're growing rapidly in a traditional hierarchy sense, a lot of times those positions are created, and you have a VP of operations that doesn't really oversee anybody, and so you have to really kind of go through that and ingrain it. It's not really conducive to any interactive communication, because like typically hierarchies and chain of command styles work from communication comes from the top and disseminates down, and there's no kind of direct line communication that goes back up. So if a bad decision is made at the executive team line, nobody's going to be able to let them know for quite some time, and they're never going to get that information back until they see firsthand that it's affecting something that they can actually notice. It doesn't promote any type of innovation and creativity like I talked about. It's not made for companies that want their employees to innovate or think outside of their norms or try new things. It's not conducive for any of those things. It's not set up for it. It's not built for that. And there's really no communication line or incubation for this to be there. It does have limits to organizational communication as far as where it goes. Like I said, it's very rigid as far as the communication line, and it can create a political leadership climate, like cliques, so to speak. And I'm sure many of us have worked for organizations that had political climates within them. Not that they were, Republican or Democrat, meaning that there were certain groups that were favored or certain individuals that were promoted or moved through the organization a lot easier than others because of their relationships within their little groups. So traditional hierarchies build those. It kind of is conducive to creating that environment of the clique, so to speak, or the good old boys group, as many organizations like to call, as far as people that are favored and not favored within the organization. Now, another one I always like to discuss is web. This is very conducive and widely used in the technology area. Very famously used by Apple and Steve Jobs' type setup. This is broken up in responsibilities and functions, typically and similar to a hierarchy, but it's kind of broken up into functionality and a lot more decentralized and fluid, so to speak. It's used by most tech companies. It's easily scaled and pushes a lot of self-management. And it's great for CEOs that want to, and executive branches that want to get involved in most of the organization's day-to-day. The benefits of using a web structure is it is easy to scale, so it's not hard to and conducive to do. It can grow very quickly and be scaled to needing additional departments, positions, etc. It allows leadership to easily get involved in the day-to-day operations and very communicative with the various organizational departments and functionalities and day-to-day of any of the frontline, mid-level managers or any of that. There's always a direct line of communication and setup within the web topology that you can, as a C-level executive or any person within the organization, can find a lineage area to get information to and from whoever they're trying to communicate with. The web structure does promote top-down and down-up communication because it is a very viral setup where anyone can get in line with communicating with anybody within the organization. It sets up employees to be very self-managed and accountable because they do have roles and responsibilities, but they are in charge of their own day-to-day operation with a streamlined communication line between them and the executive branch and the executive staff and any leadership material there. And there's a lot of easy collaboration between departments because of this. Because it's set up that way, it makes it much easier for a systems thinking, which allows everybody to kind of know what they all do and also get information from each individual department quite simply and very easily as well. The limitations are kind of scarce, with all honesty, with this, but it can still have redundant positions based on how it's built. There can be a lot of overlap or not so much like systems thinking, and people can be kind of pushed out in islands depending on what they're specifically doing for the organization. So it can alienate certain departments that are built up depending on how they're specifically working. They don't really discuss this, but if you ever know much about Steve Jobs, he actually did recluse his R&D department to specifically working on tasks and kept a lot of the other parts of the organization dark to what they were specifically working on until it was time for them to see that fruition. But anyway, it can, depending on the executives, it can have too much executive involvement. If you have someone that's not the right mindset or leadership in order to handle that kind of day-to-day involvement, it can become micromanaging and almost counterproductive, so to speak. And so then this structure is very dependent on the quality employees and leadership that are attached to it. If you have weak leaders, if you have non-accountable employees that don't have the skill sets or the abilities to work in this kind of environment, it can become difficult to manage and to kind of push through that, and can cause the environment to turn very uneasy and confrontational quite simply with that setup. But like I said, most tech companies use this structure. It doesn't have a lot of limitations, but it is very conducive or very needed that you have the right people in place in order to make this successful and you have the right mindset. Now, One of the very popular ones for small organizations is flat structures. Now, flats is very easily, everyone has their own job and responsibility. They don't have to necessarily talk to one another. It's very good for startups with very few people working for them, maybe some contracts and vendors attached to it as much. It lowers a lot of conflict and any political problems because there's not a lot of collaboration. There's not a lot of accountability between the groups. It's just you're accountable for your work. So it makes it very easy to know exactly who messed up or where I guess the weak link is, so to speak. So the benefits of a flat structure, if you're running an organization, it's very easy to set up. Like you as an entrepreneur, you set up a flat organization, you start up, whatever specific job functions you need or contract work or basically whatever tasks need to get done, you assign that to somebody, whether it's an employee, a contract that you're putting out there, and that person gets the job done. Very easy setup. You as the owner slash operator slash CEO or whatever you want to call yourself, you're just responsible for managing those individuals that are doing jobs for you. So if small, it's quite easy to manage. If you only have a handful of people doing very specific tasks for you, it gets very easy. It's easy to manage that setup. And it's very easy to assign accountability because each individual that is reporting to you has a specific task or job that they're doing for you. And they may or may not even discuss it with each other. They might not even know each other exist. They have a job, they're doing it for you, and that's pretty much it. So everyone has their own responsibility. It can and also allows you to contract positions if needed, so that saves you money and time within you're setting up an organization, and allows you to kind of be more lean doing it this way. It allows you to have complete control of all areas of the business. So you don't have to unload control. You can manage the specific tasks that need to get done quite easily this way. So flat structures are very, very conducive to small entrepreneurs and startups that have very limited amount of employees or people doing stuff for them because it's easy to set up that way. Now, when you look at the limitations, though, the only thing that causes strife with this is that it does not really scale very well. If you think about it from a standpoint of a managerial aspect, the reason that hierarchies and the kind of like the webs and the structures happen is because the one person at the top can't remotely be able to manage a very large group of individuals on a day-to-day basis. If the C-level person or you as the owner start to have anywhere from 20, 50, 100 different people doing different tasks for you, that becomes very, very unmanageable for one person to do specifically. So it can't scale very well. You're going to have to create some kind of a system in order for you to make sure you can manage all that. So typically flat structures are not long-term solution sets if you're planning on growing your organization. So if you're growing, it makes it very difficult to manage, because before you know it, and you want to be in the front end of this, because before you know it, you start a flat structure, you contract a couple employees to do specific tasks for you, or contract a couple of companies to do things, and all of a sudden now you got more contracts, more work, and before you know it, you have 35 different things that you're trying to manage all at once, and it becomes unmanageable for you to specifically know what's even going on. And another limitation is it doesn't promote any type of innovation or creativity, because it's pretty much task oriented. So people have roles and responsibilities and a job to do and accountability. They focus on that. So they're not going to think of new ways or innovative ways to do anything, because they honestly, most of them don't even know what other people do for you. They're just contracted or employed to do a very specific task for you and the organization. So, and then also with communication, not everyone actually even communicates or has access to each other. Certain people that you bring on may or may not know they exist and have communication lines, because they have to work together, or whatever their work is intertwines with another person's. But a lot of times they're all on islands, and they don't really know what's going on with other people within that organization or the other contracts or vendors that you may have. And it's not their job to. They've been assigned a specific task, and they do it. So communication is not really a thing with flat structure. So, but if you need that to happen, a flat structure is not going to be something scalable or used long term for this type of situation. So, what can happen in another version that organizations can use is flatarchies, which is kind of a mix between a traditional hierarchy and a flat organization, so to speak. And so It has more management in place and promotes a lot more communication lines, but it also has its limitations, which we'll discuss. It creates a leaner functioning organization, but you do need the right managers in place. So when you look at the overall benefits of trying to use a flatarchy, this can scale larger, but it does than a flat structure, but it does have limitations, which we'll discuss when we go to the limitations portion of it. But it can scale and be a lot more easy to use if you start with a flat structure and move to a flatarchy. It can scale that way. It can be is conducive to innovation and creating incubators. Organizations that use this structure typically have an innovation incubation within them. That this could be function, so a whole new team or department or a lineage of that setup is created based on the idea from a company, organization, or employee, and they go from that route. Communication is a lot better than a flat or traditional hierarchy because if I just go back really quickly, communication lines conducive through all the different areas. And so instead of just being very rigid that this lineage only goes up one and then this lineage is separate, they all are kind of conducive and have a communication line with each other. So it's a little bit more communicative than a hierarchy and a flat structure. It does have that same familiar chain of command setup, so it is easily assimilated with most employees or people that are familiar with that kind of setup, because with all honesty, most organizations run some type of hierarchy, so it makes it a little bit more comfortable that way with the titles and roles. It can be catered to most industries. It doesn't have limitations that it only works in certain and not on others. And when a new idea is presented, a new team and department is created for that incubation or for that additional add-on for the setup. So it does make it a lot more agile and a lot more, customizable based on whatever the industry or area that you're going into. The limitations that go with flatarchy is it does have scaling limitations, though. Like, it's not going to go for thousands of employees. It's not going to be conducive to that. It's more conducive for a small, medium-sized organization that can actually make that work. And so you want to keep that in mind. It can still cause redundant positions based on growth and how fast a company grows. New idea teams can become distant or isolated from the company as a whole because they are autonomized and tasked with a certain job function. They might become kind of isolated from the rest of the organization. So the internal incubator has that problem too. It does need a very fluid company and employee culture for this to be conducive and work. It's not really well perceived with a rigid leadership style or rigid employee setup or rigid culture. It needs to have kind of a really good fluid, self-managed kind of setup for this to work. And it still can create political leadership climates and cliques because of the hierarchy setup that's there. It's a little less prevalent in this type of model because of the massive lines of communication and collaboration that happen, but it's still a possibility that can happen within any type of hierarchy that you set up. It can be something that predominantly can be rearing its head based on the employees that you bring in. And then last but not least, and the one that I've done the most research and extensive push into, is a holacratic organization or holacracy. Many of you probably have never even heard this term, or maybe just have only heard it from me. But this is in a nutshell, it's a leadership organizational structure with no titles. Every department manages themselves as their own kind of entity. There is no managers or title or positions of power. So no one individual manages many. That's not the way it works. There's no power struggle with that type of setup. Decisions are made as a collective instead of a single person. So there's always a consensus or democratic-based decision that comes from this. It does require a complete buy-in from the company, so you want to make sure you have the right managers in place. The benefits of using a holacratic environment is the first thing, and not the one that's listed here, is typically holacratic environments have a higher employee morale and buy-in with the organization. They also have lower attrition. That's just statistically sound from that type of setup. Now, the benefits of you utilizing this type of setup, if you want to, is it's very easy to scale as well. You just pretty much, departments are created, or the spheres as they call them, are created based on need. So if you have a marketing department, a sales department, an executive department, whatever, strategic planning department, you just create the sphere needed, and the employees that tie into those job responsibilities or tie into that department just gear towards that, and their job is to just work together in order for their job to work. It does give much autonomy to the departments to manage themselves, and it doesn't take a lot of oversight with the right people, so you want to make sure that you do that. There's no titles or positions of power over others within these spheres. So no one person tells others what to do. They all have a specific job role and responsibility, and it works that way. So departments make decisions as a group. So like I said, it's consensus. It's a democratic-based decision. Company-wide decisions must be made with the full company consensus. And this is typically done if, this is typically done that if a company-wide decision has to happen, each individual department or sphere will, depending on the size of the organization, will either meet with the rest of them and they'll come to a consensus of best practices or needs for the organization down the line. Or if it's not scalable or going to take too long in order to do that, each department can elect a single individual to go on their behalf, like a representative, to discuss and give the best practices and their insight to what they want to have happen within the organization. So it allows a lot more communication to happen, and with all honesty, it will limit the bad company decisions based on everyone having an input to the pros and cons of all the decisions that may or may not happen. So everyone's concerns are brought into attention, and everything is kind of like all stones are turned over and looked at when it comes to this situation. So there's lots of communication, and no one group can make decisions that affect others without the consent of that group. So you as a department can make decisions based on whatever happens within your sphere, your department area, but if whatever decision you need to make is going to affect a different area of the company, that area or department has to be intertwined and brought in for the decision making, and there has to be a consensus made by those two groups or three groups or four groups to ensure that the decision is proactively beneficial to all, which is a good and bad thing, which we'll talk about the limitations now to it. So limitations with holacracy can deter people familiar with titles from the organization. So one of the good case studies I always like to discuss is Zappos in Vegas, which has been purchased by Amazon, but they have let them kind of keep running themselves. They're a very large retailer, and they've adopted the holacratic model. And when they originally did this years ago, they had a high attrition in the beginning, and then it kind of trailed off, and their employee morale and their attrition employee morale went high, and their attrition went very low. But the initial push to this did have a counteraction of the people that were vice presidents or felt like they worked for these titles and these positions of power, to have that kind of seized from them because it's not what they were rolling with. A lot of those people left looking for, feeling that they were, I guess, not being either compensated or not being showcased enough for what they were doing. Anyway, so it can deter people that want certain titles from joining the organization, which, with all honesty, is not going to be, you don't want those individuals in this type of organizational setup anyway, because it's not conducive for it. Decisions can take longer due to the democratic-based voting structure. So decisive decisions become a little harder because with the consensus vote and decisions, it's more of a lengthy process, right? It has to be vetted. It has to go through its structure. It's similar to how our republic government works, which at the moment does nothing, but that's a different discussion we can have. But with more hands in the pot and more decisions being made with a consensus, it does take a little bit longer, even though the decisions will be more positive and typically have a better outcome because of this. But it does need a certain type of employee and leadership for this to be conducive and work. Like, people have to have a buy-in. It needs complete and utter buy-in from the leadership and company, every employee, for this to be successful. Otherwise, the wrong mindsets will not mesh well with this type of holacratic setup and this hugely democratic setup that it creates. And so another limitation with it, because consensus has to be met, it can cause conflict between various departments and groups. Conflict is inevitable, but not a constructive conflict. It can cause strife conflict that can regulate and hurt the overall organization. It's a rarity, but it can happen based on need of the organization. But holacracy is there. It's something that's very prevalent, and something that's very like I said, a passion point of mine that I've done research on, and I know a lot more about it than I've let on here. But it has its pros and cons. So as an organization, as a company that you're setting up, you have to make a decision on how you're going to scale and which one you're going to kind of lean towards, use. But what I always like to talk about is that with any of these setups, none of them have to be a one-size-fits-all type structure. You can kind of customize, mix and match, and you create your organizational structure and culture based on whatever is conducive for you to do specifically for your organization and what you just want to set up. So that's that in a nutshell. So to discuss the assignments, I'm just going to go over them from this standpoint. You have a week 2 discussion, which most of you already turned in, but remember, discussions are due on Wednesday, and you have until Sunday to do your responses. So if you haven't done that yet, please do it. Make sure you get it done. And then you have organizational structure project 2 or assignment that you'll be turning into me. And what you're going to be doing is going through the various areas of sole proprietorship, limited liability company, corporations, and you're going to give me a 1 to 3